In the spring of 1945, as Europe exhaled after 6 years of destruction, investigators walked through rooms where decisions had ended. Not battlefields, not command bunkers filled with maps, but private rooms, closets, drawers, vanity tables. They cataloged what remained of a world that had collapsed. Shoes, letters, perfumes, compact mirrors. And among those items, again and again, one name appeared. Not a general, not a minister, not a strategist, but a woman who never signed an order, never commanded a unit, never addressed a crowd. Eva Braun. After the war ended, the question was not who she was. It was something far more uncomfortable. Why did she stay? Because Eva Braun had a way out. More than one. She could have left Berlin. She could have left him. She could have survived the war and disappeared into anonymity. Others did. She did not. And that decision, quiet, personal, deliberate, followed history long after the bombs stopped falling. This is not a story about love in the usual sense. It is a story about choice and what a person lives with once the world no longer gives them excuses. After 1945, no court charged Eva Braun with crimes. No tribunal debated her guilt, and yet her name never escaped judgment. Why? This story begins after the war, because the war ended on May 8, 1945. But Eva Braun's decision did not end there. It lived on in archives and testimonies, in the discomfort historians still feel when trying to place her neatly on one side of history. Victim, bystander, accomplice, or something more troubling. A person who knew enough and chose enough to be remembered anyway. If you value calm, long-form stories that explore the human aftermath of World War II, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps keep these reflective histories alive. Now, back to the story. After 1945, Eva Braun became a problem. Not for courts, but for memory, because she did not fit. She was not tried like Goering. She did not write memoirs like Speer. She did not vanish like Bormann. And unlike the women who survived camps or those who rebuilt ruined cities, Eva Braun left no testimony explaining herself. She left silence, and silence invites projection. Some called her naive. Others called her complicit. Some dismissed her as irrelevant. But irrelevance does not explain why she chose to remain in Berlin when others fled, knowing exactly what awaited them there. People often ask, did Eva Braun know? That question misses the point. The real question is, at what moment did she stop needing to know more? By early 1945, the reality was no longer hidden. Berlin was encircled. Communication was collapsing. The regime was dying in public view, and Eva Braun was not trapped. She had already been removed from danger once. She had already lived away from Hitler for long stretches. She had already seen what separation felt like. And still, when the final weeks arrived, she made the journey back. Against advice, against reason, against survival. This was not an impulsive act. It was not romantic spontaneity. It was a return. Why does someone return to a place they know will erase them? In the years after 1945, Allied interrogators questioned everyone they could find who had crossed Eva Braun's path. Secretaries, drivers, housekeepers, photographers. Their descriptions were strangely consistent. She laughed easily. She avoided politics. She wanted attention, but only from one man. She lived inside a bubble deliberately constructed to keep reality out. And yet, people who survive catastrophe by avoiding reality are still making a choice. There is a difference between ignorance and insulation. Eva Braun chose insulation. After the war, psychologists began studying something new. Not trauma from violence, but trauma from proximity. How people who live near power, but not inside its machinery, processed responsibility. Eva Braun's life fit that category perfectly. She was close enough to see the privileges, far enough to avoid fingerprints, and for years that balance held, until it didn't. Because Eva Braun represents something history rarely likes to confront. Not evil executed violently, but evil accommodated quietly. She did not shout slogans. She did not enforce policy. She did not command death. She stayed. And staying in the end was enough to bind her name permanently to his. In the next part, we will examine what Eva Braun gained by staying and what she slowly surrendered without ever being forced, because every choice costs something, and not all costs are paid immediately. When the war was over, many people claimed they had been close to Adolf Hitler. Few could explain what that closeness meant. Eva Braun could, though she never did, because proximity is not power, and it is not innocence either. It is something quieter, more comfortable, and more dangerous. Eva Braun did not live under terror. She lived under exception. Long before 1945, Eva Braun learned something essential. There were places where the war did not intrude. Mountain air, terraces overlooking valleys, afternoons that followed predictable rituals. These spaces were not accidental. They were constructed. Berghof was not simply a residence. It was an environment designed to suspend reality. Here, conversations were controlled, news was filtered, silences were intentional. And Eva Braun understood the rules early. Politics ended conversations. Questions disrupted harmony. Harmony mattered, not because she was ordered to obey, but because belonging depended on it. No one told Eva Braun not to ask questions. She learned very quickly which questions made her unnecessary. After the war, many accounts focused on what Eva Braun didn't do. She didn't speak publicly. She didn't attend official meetings. She didn't shape policy. But silence was not emptiness. It came with rewards. She gained access to comfort, to status, to emotional centrality. In a world where most people orbited Hitler cautiously, Eva Braun occupied a private gravity. She was not feared. She was not respected politically. She was needed. And that need gave her a role that required only one thing. Do not disturb the illusion. Sometimes loyalty is not proven through action, but through what one refuses to acknowledge. After 1945, psychologists studying authoritarian environments noticed a recurring pattern. People closest to power often knew less, not more, than those further away. Not because information was unavailable, but because knowing came with cost. Eva Braun's life became an exercise in selective attention. She noticed moods. She noticed absences. She noticed when people stopped returning. But she learned not to connect those observations to meaning. Meaning would have required decision, and decision threatened her place. She did not deny reality. She delayed it indefinitely. One of the enduring myths after the war was that Eva Braun was kept ignorant, that she was sheltered, that she was excluded. But exclusion can be chosen. Eva Braun never demanded inclusion. She never insisted on being taken seriously. And that too was a decision. By remaining ornamental, she avoided responsibility. But she also surrendered agency. Her world shrank to one axis, him. And once that happened, alternatives slowly disappeared. A person does not lose their exits all at once. They step away from them. There were periods when Eva Braun lived away from Hitler. Those moments matter because they demonstrate possibility. She survived separation. She endured distance. She functioned without proximity. And yet, she always returned, not because she had to, but because return restored clarity. Her identity made sense only near him. Away from him, she was undefined. After the war, many survivors spoke about identity collapse. Eva Braun experienced it before the end, and she solved it the only way she knew how, by narrowing her world until it could not challenge her. The smaller the world becomes, the easier it is to stay inside it. By the final year, Eva Braun's life was already shrinking. Friends vanished. Travel narrowed. Choices simplified. Leaving would have required rebuilding identity from nothing. Staying required only consistency. And consistency is powerful. It allows people to frame inaction as loyalty, passivity as devotion, silence as virtue. After 1945, many Germans described how hard it was to break patterns once the system began collapsing. Eva Braun broke none. She followed the pattern to its logical end. There is no document where Eva Braun states her reasoning. No letter defending herself, no confession. And that absence matters, because history is often written by those who explain themselves. Eva Braun left only behavior, and behavior tells its own story. She stayed when others fled. She returned when she could have remained distant. She chose proximity over preservation, and history recorded that choice. Without commentary, without justification. After the war, survivors often described a strange sensation, not fear, not confusion, but momentum, the feeling that life had begun moving in one direction and that stepping sideways no longer felt real. Eva Braun did not lose her way out. She outgrew it. There is a moment in every moral life when choices stop presenting themselves as choices. Eva Braun's decision to return to Berlin in the final months of the war was not dramatic. There was no confrontation, no argument, no last-minute persuasion. It was administrative. Arrangements were made, permission was granted, travel was organized. The ease of it is what matters, because ease suggests acceptance, not resignation. Acceptance. People imagine final decisions as emotional. Most are logistical. Berlin was not safe. Everyone knew that. But safety was no longer the measure. Berlin represented coherence. It was where her life made sense. Outside Berlin, she would have had to explain herself. Inside Berlin, explanation was unnecessary. Everyone there had already decided not to ask, and Eva Braun understood the value of that silence. As the war closed in, physical space shrank. Rooms became corridors. Corridors became bunkers. Bunkers became routines. Oddly, this increased psychological comfort. Smaller spaces reduce complexity, choices narrow, and so does anxiety. Eva Braun's world had been narrowing for years. By the time Berlin became unavoidable, it felt familiar. A shrinking world can feel safer than an open one, if openness demands responsibility. Earlier, leaving meant separation. Now leaving meant abandonment. That distinction mattered deeply. Eva Braun had built her identity around constancy. She stayed when others drifted. She returned when others vanished. Leaving at the end would have rewritten her story, and rewriting one's story requires imagining a future. Eva Braun no longer did. After the war, philosophers described something they called irreversible alignment, when a person ties their identity so tightly to another that separation becomes psychological erasure. Eva Braun had crossed that line quietly. Not in 1945, much earlier. By the time the war was ending, her decision had already been made. Not consciously, but structurally. The most decisive choices are often made long before the moment they become visible. Paradoxically, the approaching end brought calm. Uncertainty evaporated. No more waiting. No more speculation. No more imagining alternatives. Finality simplifies life. And Eva Braun embraced that simplicity, not because she sought death, but because she no longer wanted to reconfigure existence. After the war, women who had been associated with the regime faced something harsher than courts. They faced memory, questions, suspicion, moral accounting. Eva Braun avoided all of that, not consciously, but effectively. Leaving Berlin would have meant survival, and survival would have required explanation. Staying eliminated that burden. Sometimes people do not choose death, they choose not to explain their survival. Another question often asked is why no one forced Eva Braun to leave. The answer is simple. No one needed to. She was calm, she was composed, she was resolved. People intervene when someone resists. Eva Braun did not. By the final weeks, her reasoning required no reinforcement. Leaving would have meant starting over, bearing judgment, living with unanswered questions, staying required, continuity, silence, closure. From her perspective, the choice was already settled. When the war ended, there were bodies to identify, documents to sort, and crimes to prosecute. But there were also lives that left behind something less tangible. Questions. Eva Braun did not stand trial. She did not leave testimony. She did not argue her case. And yet she entered history anyway. Not as an actor in the machinery of war, but as a problem of interpretation. Some people leave records, others leave dilemmas. After 1945, Eva Braun's name appeared in files, footnotes, and interviews, always briefly, always cautiously. She was not accused. She was not absolved. She was mentioned. And mention without explanation creates a vacuum. In that vacuum, others supplied meaning. Some portrayed her as childish, others as apolitical, others as willfully blind. Each explanation tried to make her decision less disturbing, because accepting that her choice was deliberate forces an uncomfortable conclusion That ordinary people can choose proximity to power without commanding it and still become inseparable from its consequences. History struggles most with people who did not leave evidence, but left impact. Legal systems require actions, orders given, policies signed, commands issued. Eva Braun left none of these. So the law moved past her, but moral memory did not, because responsibility is not always legal, and guilt's not always prosecutable. Eva Braun occupied a space between law and conscience, a space that remains difficult to describe without either excusing or condemning. In the decades after the war, simplified narratives took hold. She was just a girlfriend. She was kept out of politics. She was naive. These stories served a purpose. They allowed distance. They reassured observers that such choices require ignorance or manipulation. But simplicity obscures something essential. Eva Braun was not powerless. She was comfortable. And comfort can be a form of consent. Power does not only corrupt those who wield it, it reshapes those who adapt to it. Because Eva Braun never explained herself, silence became her legacy. Historians debated, psychologists analyzed, biographers speculated. But speculation is not defense, and silence does not erase decision. In fact, silence often magnifies it, because what remains unspoken invites the question, what would she have said if she had lived? Many tried to compare Eva Braun to others, to wives of officials, to secretaries, to civilians caught in systems beyond their control. But these comparisons fail in one critical way. Eva Braun was not trapped. She was invited to leave, repeatedly, and she declined, not loudly, not defiantly, but consistently. Refusal does not always sound like resistance. Sometimes it sounds like calm agreement. Eva Braun's life after the war exists only as memory, but that memory forces a question larger than her. At what point does loyalty become alignment? At what point does avoidance become participation? At what point does staying become choosing? Her story offers no neat answers, only a mirror. Most histories end at a sentence, an arrest, a verdict, a death. Eva Braun's story does not, because her meaning lies not in an ending, but in the interpretation that followed. She became a symbol not of ideology, but of quiet proximity, of how close one can stand to catastrophic power without ever touching its controls, and how that closeness can still define a life. When history closes its files, it rarely closes its questions. Eva Braun left no diary explaining herself, no recorded interview, no final reflection. What survived her was not testimony, but implication. And implication is harder to live with than certainty. Some lives end, others continue, as questions. After 1945, millions of people were forced to explain themselves, where they had been, what they had done, what they had seen, what they had tolerated. Eva Braun never faced those questions, not because she was absolved, but because she was absent. Her choice ensured she would never have to confront the aftermath. No rebuilding, no reckoning, no uncomfortable survival. But that absence did not free her from judgment. It transferred judgment to memory. Many people lived under regimes they did not choose. Eva Braun did not belong to that category. She was not trapped by law. She was not bound by office. She was not restrained by threat. Her way out was real. And that is what makes her decision endure. History treats coercion with caution, but it treats voluntary proximity with gravity. What we are forced to endure defines our suffering. What we choose to remain near defines our responsibility. Eva Braun unsettles because she removes easy explanations. She was not monstrous. She was not calculating. She was not visibly cruel. She was ordinary. And that is the discomfort. Her life suggests that catastrophic systems do not require universal fanaticism. They require enough people who choose comfort over clarity, stability over rupture, familiarity over moral risk. Eva Braun did not live to see the long aftermath, but her choice shaped it. She became inseparable from the man she stood beside. Not by decree, but by refusal to step away. That refusal echoes. It echoes in how we evaluate proximity, in how we judge silence, in how we interpret loyalty. Her life reminds us that alignment does not always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives quietly and stays. The most enduring consequences often belong to those who never had to face them. Eva Braun's story does not demand condemnation, it demands attention. It asks us to consider, at what point does staying become choosing? At what point does avoidance become participation? At what point does silence become a position? These are not historical questions alone. They are human ones, and they do not belong only to the past. There will always be new interpretations, new biographies, new psychological theories, new attempts to soften or sharpen her image. But none will fully resolve the discomfort, because Eva Braun's life does not offer resolution, it offers recognition, that people can stand near immense harm without wielding it, and still shape its moral landscape. Eva Braun had a way out. She saw it, she understood it, and she chose not to take it. That choice did not end with her. It lives on in how we think about responsibility, in how we judge silence, in how we understand the quiet decisions that shape history without ever announcing themselves. Eva Braun's decision did not occur in isolation. To grasp its meaning, we need to widen the lens, beyond her and toward those who face similar exits. After the war, history searched for explanations, not just for what happened, but for why so many people stayed where they were. Long after staying no longer made sense, Eva Braun was not alone in having a way out. She was simply one of the clearest examples. History is full of people who could have left. It remembers only a few of them. In the years following 1945, a common phrase appeared again and again. I had no choice. It appeared in testimonies, in memoirs, in private letters never meant for publication. Sometimes the phrase was true. Often it was incomplete, because alternatives do not always arrive as rescue. More often, they arrive as disruption. Leaving means loss of certainty, of structure, of identity. And many people, like Eva Braun, learn to confuse discomfort with impossibility. A way out does not feel like freedom, it feels like disorientation. After the war, historians encountered a quieter group of survivors, people who walked away before the collapse. They did not become heroes, they did not gain clarity. They lived with fragmentation. They rebuilt lives without scripts, without recognition, without the comfort of coherence. Leaving did not save them from consequence. It merely changed the kind of consequence they carried. Eva Braun understood this intuitively. Leaving would not have been a clean escape. It would have been an unstructured life, one that required explanation every day. For some, staying felt like integrity, not moral integrity, but narrative integrity. If a life has been built around proximity, departure feels like betrayal of one's own past. Eva Braun had shaped herself through consistency. She had endured absence, invisibility, waiting. Leaving at the end would have reframed all of that effort as misjudgment. And for many people, admitting misjudgment feels worse than facing consequence. People do not fear punishment as much as they fear invalidation. After 1945, survivors often spoke about loneliness. Not physical loneliness, but moral solitude. Those who left early often lived on without shared context. Their memories could not be placed easily. Those who stayed until the end shared something darker, but shared. Eva Braun chose a shared ending, not because it was noble, but because it preserved continuity. A life that ends where it began does not require reinterpretation. We often want to believe Eva Braun was unique, an anomaly, but she represents a broader pattern. Across collapsing systems, many people see the direction things are moving, recognize the possibility of departure, delay, waiting for clarity, eventually confuse delay with destiny. Eva Braun's story disturbs because it mirrors ordinary human behavior, not extremism, familiarity. History is shaped less by monsters than by people who remain. One of the most consistent patterns in post-war testimony is this. There is a moment when the question disappears, not answered, disappears. People stop asking whether they should leave. They begin asking only how to endure where they are. Eva Braun crossed that threshold long before 1945. By the end, staying was no longer a choice, it was the default. Defaults require no justification. They allow people to feel passive while still participating. Eva Braun did not need to persuade herself to stay. Staying was already happening. Leaving would have required interruption, and interruption feels aggressive, especially for people whose lives are built on accommodation. The hardest action is not resistance, it is interruption. Eva Braun's story widens when we stop treating it as exceptional. She belonged to a category history rarely isolates people close enough to power to benefit, but far enough to avoid responsibility. People whose lives depended on not asking certain questions. People who had a way out, but experienced it as an existential threat. Many others stayed. Why is Eva Braun remembered? Because her proximity was intimate, because her choice was visible, and because she did not survive to reinterpret it. Those who lived on could explain themselves. She could not. Her silence fixed her decision in place. Eva Braun forces us to acknowledge something unsettling, that having a way out is not enough. One must also accept the cost of taking it. And many people across many moments in history quietly decide that they will not. Eva Braun was not the only one who stayed. She was simply the one whose staying became permanent. And through her, we are reminded that history does not only record actions, it records refusals, it records delays. It records the moment when people stop imagining themselves elsewhere. After the war, one sentence appeared again and again. I didn't do anything. It was spoken quietly, often sincerely, sometimes with relief. For many people, that sentence felt like innocence. But history would come to understand it differently. Silence does not feel dangerous. That is why it works. Silence offers something powerful. It asks nothing. It does not require courage. It does not demand risk. It does not expose intention. To remain silent feels neutral, and neutrality feels safe. Eva Braun's life unfolded within that illusion. She did not speak publicly. She did not argue. She did not intervene. And because she did none of these things, it became easy to believe she stood nowhere at all. Action creates records. Words are remembered. Decisions are traced. Interventions leave fingerprints. Silence, by contrast, dissolves into atmosphere. It feels private, unobservable, unmeasurable. Eva Braun did not leave statements behind, but silence is not empty. It is an environment, one that allows certain realities to proceed uninterrupted. Silence rarely stops harm. It simply removes the discomfort of witnessing it. After 1945, psychologists studying authoritarian societies noticed a recurring pattern. People did not deny that harm occurred. They minimized their relationship to it. I wasn't involved. I didn't know details. It wasn't my responsibility. Eva Braun's life reflected this pattern perfectly. She remained close, but not accountable. Present, but not participatory. And in that narrow space, silence became a moral buffer. For people embedded in systems of loyalty, speech carries risk. Speaking disrupts harmony. It challenges belonging. It threatens identity. Eva Braun's value within her world was defined by stability. She did not argue. She did not demand explanation. She did not disturb the atmosphere. Silence preserved her role. And roles, once internalized, are difficult to abandon. In many systems, silence is rewarded long before it is questioned. Over time, silence stops feeling passive. It becomes principled. People begin to tell themselves, I stay out of politics. I don't judge. I focus on personal matters. These phrases sound responsible. They sound mature, but they also function as shields, protecting individuals from the discomfort of alignment. Eva Braun did not proclaim neutrality. She lived it, and that made it feel natural. At some point, silence stops being a tactic. It becomes identity. People no longer say, I choose not to speak. They say, I am not someone who speaks. Eva Braun crossed this threshold quietly. Her silence was no longer situational. It was foundational. To speak would not have been an action. It would have been a transformation. The longer silence lasts, the more speaking feels like betrayal. Not of others, but of oneself. Leaving is visible. It announces judgment. It creates narrative rupture. It demands explanation. Silence avoids all of this. One can remain present without declaring allegiance. Eva Braun did not need to defend her presence. Her silence made presence feel weightless. But presence is never weightless. It shapes what is permitted to continue. After the war, silence lost its protective quality. What once felt neutral began to feel evasive. Those who had remained quiet found themselves asked, why didn't you speak? Why didn't you leave? Why did you stay? Eva Braun never faced those questions, but history asked them on her behalf, and silence, without context, grew heavier over time. Silence can protect a person in the moment, but it rarely protects them in memory. Eva Braun's silence was not exceptional. It was human. Across eras, people choose silence because it allows them to believe they are not choosing at all. It is the least disruptive option, and that is precisely why it is powerful. Systems do not depend on universal agreement. They depend on enough people choosing quiet over rupture. Eva Braun's silence preserved her place, but it also narrowed her future. Because silence does not prepare a person for aftermath. It does not build language for accountability. It does not create distance when distance becomes necessary. By the time silence failed her, it was too late to replace it. During her life, silence felt safe. After her life, it became the center of the question. Why did she not speak? Why did she not leave? Why did she remain? Silence did not answer these questions. It amplified them. Eva Braun's silence matters because it mirrors choices people still make. Not in extreme circumstances, but in ordinary ones. Moments when speaking would complicate life. Moments when leaving would disrupt identity. Moments when silence feels easier, and therefore justified. Silence is not empty. It is a choice that feels invisible while it is happening, and unmistakable once it has passed. Eva Braun lived within silence, and that silence became her legacy. When people disappear, their decisions do not. They move elsewhere, into memory, into language, into how the story is told when the person is no longer there to tell it themselves. Eva Braun did not live to see the aftermath, but the aftermath has never stopped examining her. A decision does not need a living witness to continue shaping the world. After 1945, history began its second work, not documenting events, but assigning meaning. Files were closed, investigations ended, sentences were carried out or commuted, and then came the quieter task, understanding what choices meant once they could no longer be explained. Eva Braun entered that phase immediately. She left no commentary, so interpretation took over. Memory does not simply recall, it evaluates. It places people within moral landscapes, not as they understood themselves, but as they are understood by others. Eva Braun's memory did not benefit from ambiguity, because ambiguity invites distance. Her proximity removed it. She became inseparable from the choice to remain. Memory is where silence is finally forced to speak. Many lives end without consequence. Others end and continue to matter. Eva Braun belongs to the second category, not because of what she did, but because of what her staying represents. History often struggles to explain catastrophic systems without turning them into spectacles. Eva Braun complicates that instinct. She reminds us that harm does not require universal participation, only enough people who do not step away. Viewers often ask, was she guilty? Was she naive? Was she a victim? These questions assume resolution is possible, but some stories resist closure. Eva Braun's life does not provide a verdict. It provides a boundary, a line that shows where choice becomes identity, and identity becomes consequence. Some stories are not meant to be finished. They are meant to remain open. Proximity does not end when the person is gone. It lingers in photographs, in descriptions, in the way names are paired. Eva Braun's proximity to power defined her memory more than any belief she held, because history remembers alignment more clearly than intention, and alignment does not require words. Those who lived on after 1945 carried something heavy. Explanation. They had to answer questions. They had to contextualize their past. They had to learn a language for accountability. Eva Braun did not. Her decision spared her the burden of explanation, but it transferred that burden to history. Survival demands answers. Absence leaves only questions. Eva Braun remains uncomfortable because she does not fit easy categories. She was not visibly cruel. She was not visibly resistant. She was not visibly ideological. She was present. And presence, when sustained long enough, becomes meaningful. Her story unsettles because it denies us the comfort of extremes. Over time, Eva Braun became a reference point, not for action, for inaction. Her life helped historians articulate something difficult, That moral history is shaped as much by what people decline to do as by what they actively choose. Her silence became evidence, not of innocence, but of the limits of neutrality. Neutrality rarely survives the passage of time. Eva Braun's story endures because it repeats itself, not in form, but in pattern. People still find themselves near power. They still face moments when leaving would disrupt identity. They still experience silence as safety. Her story remains relevant because it does not rely on circumstance. It relies on human tendency. To remember Eva Braun responsibly is not to excuse or condemn. It is to observe carefully, to acknowledge how ordinary decisions can accumulate meaning, to resist the urge to simplify, and to recognize that having a way out is not the same as taking it. Eva Braun had a way out. She recognized it. She understood it, and she chose not to take it. That choice did not end with her life. It continues in how history judges proximity, in how silence is evaluated, and in how we understand the quiet decisions that shape the moral landscape of entire eras. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. The United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, or anywhere else in the world. And if someone in your family lived through World War II or lived with its aftermath, tell us what they carried forward.